If you think for a living, there's a good chance that you spend about 90% of your life indoors. Now, that's the average across the UK and the US. And if you're at a desk all day, you're probably right at the top end of that. Now, you'll probably have your screen in front of you, artificial light above you, and you might be stuck in an office for most of the day. And nature, a park, some trees, the sea, a lake, that's a nice thing that you'll do on the weekend if you've got any time left. Now, I want to change how you see that, because we treat nature as a non-essential, a nice to have, something that's good for you in a vague sort of well-being way. Lovely if you can fit it in, but not really that important. And that's completely wrong. It's one of the most measurable and underrated inputs that your brain has, and it works in ways that you probably not even thought of. And the best part is that you don't need to get into a forest or by the sea to get it. You can do most of it without ever leaving the city. And I want to show you how. Now, you might think that this is just going to be me telling you to get out for a walk. I promise it isn't. Getting out and moving is great for your brain, and I've covered that plenty of times, but this is a separate thing on top of it. This is about the environment itself, what nature does to your brain, even when you're standing still. And once you see how many different ways it affects us, it will kind of make more sense to you. So here's the idea that the whole thing sits on. So your brain was built outdoors, right? For pretty much all of human history, we lived outside, and your eyes, your ears, and your stress system all evolved reading the natural world, working out what was safe and what wasn't from light, sound, shapes, all that kind of stuff. Now, then in the space of a few generations, we moved inside, Now, sleep circadian scientist at Oxford called Russell Foster pointed out that in 1800, around the early 1800s, about 90% of us worked outdoors, and by 2000 that was under 20%. Now, in evolutionary terms, that's a blink of an eye. We've gone from an outdoor animal to one that lives in dim boxes with dodgy lighting, staring at screens, and your brain still notices that that's not right, or that something might be missing. Nature isn't an escape from real life. As far as your brain is concerned, it is real life, and we crave it, we need it. Now, let me show you the different ways that nature gets into your brain, because it's actually really quite interesting and kind of fun. So let's start with sight, through your eyes. So there's a couple of ways that this can happen, and they're both really interesting, but let's start with something that you probably never even thought of before: the actual shapes that you see in nature. So if you look at a tree or a fern or a coastline or a cloud or whatever, and you'll notice the same pattern repeating at every scale. So the big branch splits into smaller branches, and then they split into smaller branches again. Now, these patterns are called fractals, and nature is absolutely full of them. Now, a physicist called Richard Taylor has spent years looking at what these patterns do to us, and it turns out your visual system, over all those millions of years outdoors, has got so good at reading nature's particular kind of fractal that it processes it almost effortlessly, and when it does, something measurable happens. So your brain settles into a calmer state. You get more of those easy alpha brainwaves, and your body tips over towards the parasympathetic, or the rest and digest. Now, in his work, just looking at these natural patterns brought people's stress down by as much as 60%. That's a huge effect for simply looking at something, 60%. And it's not only the shapes, there's the colour itself. So there's this nice little study where people cycled whilst watching some nature footage, and the researchers quietly sort of changed the colour on them. So it was the same film, but they tinted it green or grey or red. And when it tinted it green, people felt better, and the effort of the cycling felt a bit easier. Now, when it was red, they actually felt more irritable, and the cycling felt harder. Now, it's only a small kind of study, so I don't want to kind of oversell it, but the idea is lovely, right? Green for your ancestors meant plants and water and food and safety, and a bit of that might just be wired deep enough that the colour on its own does you a small favour, before you've even taken a step or done any cycling or any exercise. And the next input is through your nose. Now, this one is so interesting. I love this. So trees are under attack all the time from bugs and bacteria and fungi, and they can't exactly run away. So they defend themselves chemically by giving off this airborne compound called phytoncides. And it's basically the tree's kind of own immune system floating around in the air of a wood, and you can smell it. You know, when you're walking through a pine wood, that's the smell. And when you breathe that air in, something happens to you. So a Japanese researcher called Dr. King Lee, apologies if I've mispronounced that, has shown that a trip into the forest raises your natural killer cells, which are your immune cells that go around hunting down kind of damaged and infected cells. And that boost has been shown to last for days afterwards. And really interesting, I love this experiment. So his team took the oil from cypress trees and just released it into a hotel room over a few nights. So no forest at all. And people got the same immune bump that they did when they were in the forest. So when you're walking through the wood, the trees are kind of in a sense medicating you through the air. Now, I think that's amazing because there's a load of other things that phytoncides can do as well. So that's just one thing, but really cool. And the next input is through your ears, so you know what you can hear in nature. So there's this cool study out of Berlin where they had people listen to either 6 minutes of birdsong or 6 minutes of traffic noise. The birdsong, they found, lowered their anxiety, and the traffic did the opposite and dragged their mood down as well. And the reason why is pretty cool. Now, for your ancient brain, birdsong is basically the all clear. You know, when the birds are relaxed enough to sit and sing, there's no predator about, nothing's wrong. So you're safe and you can just relax and chill. It's when the birds suddenly go quiet that something might be coming. Now, you're not consciously thinking any of this, you know, but a part of you is still listening for that. And it settles you. You know, when you hear it, it definitely settles you. And look, I'll be honest with you, you know, that one didn't sharpen anyone's thinking on the test. It worked on how safe and how calm they felt. But for someone walking around carrying a lot of tension, that's really important. Where that tension comes from meetings and from work stuff or performing in boardrooms or whatever, it's a wonderful little tool. And here's one that I think might matter most for you, especially if you think for a living. So the kind of attention that you use for hard, focused work, you know, kind of reading a contract, building a model, or, I don't know, concentrating through a tricky problem is really effortful. And it runs down. It's called directed attention. And by the afternoon, you can really feel it's kind of worn thin. Now, the trouble with a city is it never lets you rest, right? You're crossing roads, dodging people, reading signs, you know, looking out for traffic. All those things keep pulling on the very same system. So a walk down a busy street doesn't recharge you. It just kind of shifts the drain somewhere else. Now, nature does the opposite. It holds your attention gently, like leaves moving around and water going past. It doesn't demand anything of you. And that kind of soft, easy attention or sounds that you're noticing lets your hard, focused attention quietly kind of refill. And in one study, people did a demanding memory test, then either walked in a park or walked through town, then did the test again. Now, the park group came back about 20% better. The town group didn't improve at all. Same walk, same effort, all down to what they were looking at and hearing. And here's the useful bit, really, I think. Even just, you know, looking at pictures of nature gave people some of it. So this is the one to really hold on to, I think. Use it as a tool. Nature is how you recharge. You know, it's the exact part of your brain your job spends all day running down. Getting out into nature refills, restores that, lets you go back to work better than ever. Now, so it's really important that I'm always straight with you about what this all means and the actual kind of ceiling on it, because a lot of these studies show links rather than nailing down cause. Now, some of them are small and we're still working them out, exactly, you know, which bit is doing what. You know, is it the air, is it the light, the sounds, the shapes, and it's very probably all of it at the same time, you know. So I'm not going to go and I don't want to kind of tell you that if you go for a walk in the park, it's some sort of magic pill, but the direction is really, really strong, and it keeps pointing the same way. And unlike almost anything else that I could or anyone else could suggest, this one costs you nothing and there's no downside at all. So how much do you actually need? So this is where it gets more practical. So there was a really big study of around 20,000 people, and the number that they landed on was 2 hours a week. Under that, they didn't really see much improvement. At 2 hours or more, people were constantly healthier and happier. And it didn't seem to really matter how you got there, whether it was one long Sunday walk or a few short visits, scattered across the week. It worked pretty much in the same way. And there's another study, a smaller study, on the short version that's pretty handy to know. And it's 20 to 30 minutes of sitting or walking somewhere green was enough to bring down your cortisol. And cortisol is your main stress hormone. And so that's kind of shape of it, really. 2 hours a week, banked in 20 or 30 minute chunks wherever they fit in is ideal. And it is a case of the more the better. Here's the part that I really want you to take away, because I think it's where a lot of people kind of lose interest because they think it's a bit unachievable. But you don't need to, live near a forest or the ocean or anything for any of this. You can get it right in the middle of the city. So let's just take one example, which is a really good one. It's one of the classic studies, and it's patients recovering from the same operation, and they did better, they recovered better simply if their beds faced a window with some trees rather than a brick wall. Now, they left hospital sooner and they needed fewer of the strong painkillers just from changing the view out the window. And city planners have actually turned this into a simple rule that they use now, and it's a pretty good one because you can apply it to your own life, I think. And they call it 330 300. Now, you should be able to see at least 3 trees from your own home. Your neighborhood should have around 30% tree cover, and you shouldn't be any more than 300 meters from a proper bit of green space. Now have a think about where you land on that. Think about your own home or your office or whatever. Does that work for you? And it isn't only green. Water really counts too. And researchers call that blue space. And that can be the sea, a river, a canal, even maybe like a fountain or something can work as well. So in one big study, people were reliably happier the moment they got near water, and living near the coast aligned with less mental stress. Now, this is why architects and designers have started building nature into offices and hospitals on purpose. The plants, natural light, wood, water, even patterns on the walls, tuned into. This is why architects and designers have started building nature into homes, offices, and hospitals. They do it deliberately, and they put plants and natural light and wood and water, even kind of patterns on the wall, tuned into those calming natural shapes that I discussed. And if you look at Singapore has more or less turned itself into it's like a city in a garden. It's not really for decoration, it's applied neuroscience. So here's what I'd actually do with all of this. Aim for 2 hours a week. Stop thinking of it as one big kind of expedition. Just bank it in little kind of 20 or 30 minute doses. So walk the route through the park instead of, along the main road. Take your coffee and go and sit under a tree, for example. Have your lunch outside. Little things like that, little doses like that. Then try and set up your surroundings so you've got more kind of nature around you coming without any effort. So put your desk by the window, get yourself a view of something green if you can, and if you can't, a couple of plants on your desk. Get some proper daylight on you in the morning, and on the days that you're stuck inside, without any access to any of that, then even just a nature scene on your screensaver or birdsong in your headphones, those things do a lot. And it sounds almost too simple, but the research keeps saying that it really helps. And use it as a tool. Use it to reset between hard blocks of thinking, not just as a weekend treat. when your focus is shot at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, as it often is with a lot of us, 20 minutes out in green is the recharge that you need. It's the exact system that you spent all day draining. So when you get the full thing, the actual woods or the coast or the hill, then do it, because that's everything all open at the same time. The air, the light, the sound, and the shapes all working on you together. For what it's worth, this is most of my social life these days. My mates and I used to mark big occasions with, big heavy weekends away somewhere. But these days we're more likely just to catch up and go for a walk, maybe climb a mountain in Wales. Most of my weekends with the kids is just walking around the local countryside or heading down to the beach or something. And we don't do this to try and improve. We do it because we just feel better for doing it, all of us. So let me try and put it all together. So your brain was built outdoors, and modern working life has kind of quietly cut it off from the thing that it needs, or the thing that it evolved to expect. And nature gets in loads of different ways, whether that's the shapes that you see, the air that you breathe, the birds that you hear. And that gentle attention lets your worn out focus refill. Now, you only need roughly 2 hours a week in whatever chunks suit you, and you really don't need to move to the countryside to get it. You just need to let a bit more of it kind of back into this city and the working week that you've already got. Nature isn't a non-essential, and it shouldn't be the reward at the end of a tough week. It might just be one of the best tools and underrated tools that you have for improving your cognitive performance, and it's sitting right outside. And if you want a clearer picture of how you're training, sleeping, eating and recovering at the moment, and how all of that is showing up in your work, I've put together a free 3-minute assessment that looks at exactly that, and the link is in the description below. And if this was useful and interesting, the newsletter is where I go deeper in this kind of stuff every single week. And this week I've laid out that forest air study properly, the one where your trees boost your immune system through the air. So you can see it properly and have a good look at it yourself if you like, and you can subscribe for that below as well.